Hello, this is the Torg Eternity Delphi Council Debriefings, where the storm has a name. We are your hosts, Leamon, Jay, and Mark, and today we will be going through the second half of the Orrorsh Cosm cards, numbers 11 through 20. Before we get into that, we do wish to encourage anybody who wishes to email us at torgdcd@gmail.com. Send us your comments, send us your questions. We will read the emails in a future episode and answer your questions to the best of our abilities. Having said that, let's go ahead and jump into these Cosm cards. Number 11 is called Interruption. Play when under attack or about to be noticed by a single creature. An outside distraction causes it to break off its attack or draws the creature away. It remains in the area, but loses track of the Storm Knights unless they draw attention to themselves. So, Jay, your thoughts on Interruption?
I think this is a very good Cosm card. It follows the tropes, of like a horror movie where it's like you think, oh God, it saw me, but then it turns, and walks away. Jason goes off that way, and sure, he'll get you later, but it's also good because it helps the entire party, so it doesn't really matter who gets it as long as somebody gets it. And since Orrorsh tends to not just be about going in guns blazing, there's usually a lot more sneaking around and trying to do things in like a special way. So this would seize a lot more play in my experience. I just think it's a really good one. You just have to be aware though that it's like it helps you once, but then after that, like it doesn't guarantee anything after that one. You step on the twig, they don't notice. You go step on another twig, that's too bad. Too bad. But it's also a good insurance against a mishap on a stealth roll.
Mm-hmm.
Really good.
Mark, your thoughts on Interruption?
Yeah, you can, from a player's perspective, this is a good card. You can even plan around this card and use it like we need to sneak across things here, we need to distract the bad guy or whatever, and like throwing the stone, and they look over there and you're running across behind them or something like that. The bad guy's there, the bad guy's coming or is getting ready to get you, and you can play that so that you've triggered them. Like Jay said, your stealth roll has failed. Your plan didn't go quite according to plan. That never happens, right? And oh no, let's play this, and up, and the stormtroopers are looking away. Or in this case, the Jason turns and goes somewhere else, and you get to carry on with what you're doing. So yeah, good card.
Yeah, I like it because it's also kind of a dual use. You can use it if you notice it and it doesn't notice you, like Jay said, either a stealth, like an automatic success on a stealth type thing, or you could do it in combat to get something, that creature to go off. So you can split the enemies if you use it in that way. So I think that's also cool if you're fighting two vampires and it seems to be pretty difficult for your group, then you could use this to get rid of, at least temporarily, one of the vampires as something comes in to distract it. I think it's a pretty cool card. And along with, look at our part one, we were saying that a lot of people don't like Orrorsh cards. This one really, even first glance, it's not a bad card. So there's some that when you read it at first you're like, but we've encouraged and given reasons why to play them. This is just a good card.
Yeah, this card has no downside, no corruption test, nothing. It just happens.
So let's move on to 12, Paralyzed by Fear. Play when a Storm Knight fails a fear test. The player of this card gains one possibility. The Storm Knight who failed loses their next turn, becomes very vulnerable, and gains two possibilities. So, Jay, your thought on Paralyzed by Fear?
This, I guess, is the opposite of that because this has a horrible downside. And on paper, this seems good, right? It's like, okay, lose an action. And I failed the fear test anyways, so I was already going to be, well, I guess very stymied. So now I'm very vulnerable as well. What's the worst that could happen? I have seen this card used multiple times, and the worst has happened almost every time. I found it has not actually usually been worth it. But that said, it's usually because it's been in like sort of pickup games with people that don't necessarily play together a lot. And in those kind of games, people are just sort of doing their own thing. So if you have sort of a well-oiled machine of a party, and sure, you can make one of the people who failed their fear test very vulnerable and lose their turn, but as long as you can cover them with someone else, then maybe it's fine. But on the other hand, as the GM, if you play this and it's Orrorsh, you probably should go after that person, right? Like, you got to make them earn those two possibilities. That said, I've seen those two possibilities get used for soaking a lot. So it ends up not really being worth it. So this is one that you really have to think about and, no, don't just play it automatically. The neat thing is, I mean, it's three possibilities essentially because that person could be you. Right? So you could play this on yourself and gain three possibilities. But even more than the very vulnerable, it's the losing your turn that's the big issue. And I have seen some discussion whether you still get to pool a card or not. But either way, losing a turn is big. And there's a reason why that was like that used to be the outstanding player's call all the time that people would pull before it got taken away because it's so powerful to make something lose their turn. So yeah, it's rough.
Mark, your thoughts on Paralyzed by Fear?
So there's some math involved with this one, right? Your party's going to be a net 3 possibilities. The person, and now as Jay pointed out, if you to me in a perfect storm, if I fail the fear test, I play it on myself, I gain the 3 possibilities. So right, so you're up 3, but typically it's going to be the person I play it and Jay gets 2 because he failed and I get 1. I would expect on average that means that net Jay gets a possibility and I get a possibility because, as Jay pointed out, if I'm the GM, I have a target that I've now acquired because he's frozen with fear, and I get bennies to go after him, which means probably a soak roll if I do moderately well. So roll if you're at all lucky with the soak roll, hey, you get 1.
But
the
you're
guy
already
gets
very
1.
stymied too.
You are, yeah, but that could mean a net 2, but the guy that played it gets 1. So, somebody got something out of it. Yeah, I lost my. Then here's the order of operations. Lose the next turn. So if you did this, I can't. It's a situational thing. If you play it before someone takes their action this round, then they lose their turn this round. But if they have already if they've already taken their action this round, it says they lose their next turn. So they're still going to lose a turn, but we're in the second round of combat. And honestly, the second and the third round of combat to me are more important than the first round because you've established what's going on. People have either figured out what we need to do, and now we need to be getting after that path, or we don't know yet, and we need to figure it out. And so we're getting deeper into the hole. We need to figure this out quicker. And so when you lose your action for the second and the third round, it's more important because you've got key things that need to happen. So I'm not the very stymied, very vulnerable kind of thing doesn't really bother me necessarily because if you failed your fear test, you're very stymied, and you're going to be very vulnerable now too. Yeah, okay. I mean, fear is fear. It does this. I'm just harder to do stuff. If I was already planning on putting a possibility on my action anyway, I'm already planning on putting a possibility on my action. So the very vulnerable, or excuse me, the very stymied doesn't bug me as much as it sounds like it ought to, just because I was going to get an auto 10, generally speaking, anyhow, on top of whatever I start my die roll. So yeah, it's situational.
Yeah, I would agree. This is one that, to me, it's a better version of the ones that just mess somebody else up and you get the possibilities because at least you're giving the other person something. But as both Jay and Mark said, that losing the next turn can be pretty harsh, especially as as the rounds continue, and their vulnerable target, positive, +4 for somebody attacking you, or your defenses having basically a -4, can lead to you spending both of those possibilities. So it's good for one person at least. The other person, it's going to be very situational and what the luck of the die is. But it's very flavor Orrorsh, so that part of it is good. So let's move on to 13. The thing that you, in most tabletop role-playing games, you always hear not to do, and this is called Let's Split Up. Play when any kind of dangerous encounter begins. Any Storm Knight who is alone gains 2 possibilities. Any Storm Knight who are together in teams of 2 or more lose 1 possibility instead. So, Jay, your thoughts on Let's Split Up?
Oh, I love this card. Because it really reinforces those horror movie tropes, right? And the thing is, there's 2 big saving graces for this card. Like, first, the players are the ones that set this up, right? Mm-hmm. It's not like you as the GM are saying, all right, you all need to split up. And they're like, we would never do this. Don't boss us around kind of thing. But they have to decide to split up. And when they do, they have to decide to play this. So it's not a play immediately on some trigger. So it's all on the players to do this, which is the one thing that can get around lose a possibility. Because lose a possibility is probably one of the roughest things you can do, unless everyone's already out of possibilities. But, so that way, if it's mid-adventure and maybe 2 of the characters are out of possibilities, they can still hang out, right? But everyone else needs to go off on their own, and then this can get played. And it does have to be a dangerous encounter, so they can't just kind of cheese it by going off and then, just playing it when they're alone. Something has to actually happen, and it has to actually be dangerous, so there's a problem. And as a GM, you will have to adjudicate what counts as split up. If they're just in the next room, does that really count if they can just spend 1 round of movement to move back in? If it's a haunted house, maybe the door will close and lock and they can't get through or something like that. So if they want to be treated as split up and get the possibilities for it, they need to be split up, and you have to ensure that they are. But yeah, really love this card.
Mark, your thoughts on Let's Split Up?
I am with Jay on this. I love this card. It is absolutely a trope reinforcing card for Orrorsh. I would like to point out, though, that the people who hang out, this is not only the people who hang out are boned or whatever. This is an all or nothing, because it says, you help me if I'm reading this wrong, any Storm Knights who are together in teams of 2 or more lose 1 possibility instead. So it isn't everybody gains 2 possibilities. If you're the people who are by themselves gain 2, and the people who aren't teamed up lose 1. It's instead. So the people who are alone don't get any possibilities. The people who have grouped up instead lose 1. That's how I read that.
Okay, I read the instead of gaining the 2 possibilities, you lose 1 possibility. So that will be one that Game Master decides.
Could be table variation, sure.
The fact that it says any Storm Knights who are, not if any Storm Knights are, kind of leads me to think it's some get 2, some lose 1.
Okay, I mean, I could roll with that, sure. I could roll with the guys that have decided, the Storm Knights who have decided to go by themselves all gain 2, and the Storm Knights who are grouped up lose 1 each.
Yeah, that's my reading.
Okay, I could go with that. I mean, but as Jay pointed out, this is the Storm Knights get to make an active decision on this one, and if everybody wants to group up, and everybody's together, everybody kicks 1 out apiece instead of gaining 2. It might, depending on what the dangerous situation is, that could be worth it.
Mm-hmm.
But
you probably wouldn't play it then.
Well, maybe not. That might be the discussion you have. That's probably a good idea. You don't get anything out of it. That's fair. So Except I'm not going to steal any thunder. We got a card coming up that I don't know. It could kick this off. It could kick this off unintentionally. So I don't know.
True.
I don't know. Two per person is strong juju though. So I mean, you're like, oh, dude, we all split up, and yeah, is in the next. I might count as in the next room, depending on what the dangerous situation is. If I've unleashed, the Gaunt Man or the major nightmare, and you're in the next room, sure, you're going to spend a round. The one person that's in the room by themselves has to go toe to toe with the Gaunt Man or the major nightmare, and just get destroyed for one round because everybody's spending a round coming back. Yeah, I might count that. But if it's just facing mooks and you're one round your mook slayer is one round away and you just have to survive a round until they get to you, maybe not. It's again situational.
Yeah, I like the feel of the card. It's something that I completely agree with both of you. And Jay, when you said that, it's the players who determine this card gets played and who's alone and who's together. So if you got the party that they, the one guy's alone and he's like, I really need two possibilities. Sorry, guys. Then they're the ones who decided to stay together. So it is kind of players make the decision. And it's the only thing the game master does is collect those possibilities that got played so he can put them over on the side. So let's move on to 14, Law of Catharsis. Play when you discover one of a nightmare's secrets. All Storm Knights gain one possibility. So Jay, your thoughts on Law of Catharsis?
Well, you should probably take this out if there's no nightmare in the game. That's the big one. I'm not really a huge fan of this card because it just seems kind of boring. It's one possibility on top of already getting something good. So it's slightly win more, but not by enough to really care. It could just say get a possibility each, right? Yeah, I mean it's okay. I guess as a player, you're like, oh, I hope there's a nightmare and we can we can play this, because realistically, if there is a nightmare, you are going to uncover the secrets unless you're like actively trying not to, basically. So it's just a guaranteed possibility. But so I guess like mechanically, it's okay. I just find it kind of boring.
Mark, your thoughts on Law of Catharsis?
The name's apt, but I don't know that there is a Law of Catharsis in Orrorsh beyond this card. It's not really tied to anything other than the secrets. I might let it trigger if there's no nightmare. I might let it trigger because there's always secrets. There's always some kind of secret to be discovered, right? So I might let it trigger on discovering the secret, whatever that happens to be. And adjudicate it that way if there's no nightmare. Because otherwise, this is one of those cards that you get it and you're like, I can't do anything with this, or you hold it for the entire act and you never got to play it. I don't see there's zero downside on this one. I'm okay with giving people possibilities just for, hey, we found a secret, which we were going to do anyway. Here, you take a possibility because you got this card. There are plenty of other, there are cards in the Orrorsh deck that just are awful and people are totally boned, and this one's not one of them. And so, okay, give them one that doesn't, rake them over the coals. I'm fine with that.
So yeah, I see this as the cherry on top. It's like Jay said, you get something good anyway. I would also say that just if the adventure itself doesn't have a nightmare doesn't mean that you're necessarily not going to learn a secret of some nightmare out there. Or
you could put one in there.
I could see where you have various adventures that aren't linked to a certain one, but you start finding secrets, and then that leads to another adventure of that specific nightmare. So you could do that. Doesn't have to be the nightmare in the adventure. It could be a nightmare. But yeah, it's basically a trigger to give everybody a free possibility. So good for players. and that. So let's move on to 15, Stalked. All Storm Knights feel they are being watched. Play this card face up at the beginning of the scene to gain 2 possibilities. The GM may discard it to change any encounter into a surprise. Until then, all fear tests suffer a -2 penalty. So, what are your thoughts on Stalked, Jay?
I've seen this card wreck people. It seems innocuous, but it's worth noting only the person who plays it gets the 2 possibilities. It's not everybody. And a -2 to all fear tests is kind of rough. Because,
And there will be fear tests.
Spoiler, there's going to be some fear tests in Orrorsh. The question is how many, what are you facing? But the -2 is bad, but surprised. We just talked about how bad it is for one character to lose their action. By making it a surprise round, everyone loses their action. And this can really get in there, especially if these... And it doesn't even have to be by something causing fear tests either. It can be anything. You've just had this feeling in the back of your mind the whole time. It's flavorful. I've actually had this come up when the whole concept of the adventure was that people were getting premonitions about things, and someone used some psychic power for premonition, and then they just played this the next scene. It's like, okay, it fits very well. But yeah, it can really change things, so you've got to be ready for it. It's going to depend on your group, of course, and when you play it, what kind of scene it is, because it doesn't say it lasts until the GM triggers it. So as a GM, you have to really think about when you want to do that, because -2 to fear tests is scary even for players, because they know that that's hovering over them. That's where the premonition, the feeling of being stalked for players comes from. Like, they know, but then as soon as you activate it, it's gone, right? So it could end up remaining the entire adventure, like the entire act. You don't have to trigger it, but then when you do, you have to be careful not to just kill everybody, because it's quite possible you could. If there's like a tank, they'll be fine, but if there's like a few squishies in the party, and they're flat-footed, you could potentially wipe them out. So you've got to be really careful with it.
So your thoughts, Mark, on Stalked?
I love this card. Specifically because it's the GM who decides when it's triggered, and it has an ongoing effect as long as it's on the board until it's triggered. And the players get to determine when it's played, but the GM determines, do I want to keep the -2 for the fear test up, or do I want to zero them out and just zero out their first round actions? Nobody gets to do anything, and then move on. I really like it for that reason, because it, as Jay said, this is one of those things that brings a tangible sense of dread to the players at the table that they don't have to fake as if they're role playing, because they're all waiting for the other shoe to drop from this card once they know it's there. And that to me is absolutely just fantastic. I like to leave this one running just for that. But Jay's absolutely correct. You can totally wreck people with this by zeroing out their first round of actions, because if you did it on like the dramatic scene when the nightmare shows up and you haven't found out any secrets yet, and they've got all their possibilities and everything's up, and then you surprise them and they get no action, you could seriously test somebody for defeat, or have somebody test for defeat right then and there, because this could be bad.
So yeah, this one's interesting in that it's not a play immediately, but you do play at the beginning of the scene. And then the player is determining that the card gets played or not. And then the game master determines when it's triggered. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic there. The players decide,
it's cooperation.
Yes, it's cooperation for fear.
Yeah.
And as both Jay and Mark have stated, the -2 to fear is a lot worse in, say, Orrorsh than the -4 to persuasions we've talked about in other Cosms. It's not that, and players tend to not really care as much about a negative to a persuasion going wrong as a negative to a fear test going wrong. So, yeah, it's interesting. Also, as Jay pointed out, the two possibilities are for the player who played it. So it's a one person benefits, but everybody else suffers the consequences. So interesting card. I think it fully envelops the essence of Orrorsh and that. So I like the card. It's very flavorful. So let's move on to card 16, Last Gasp. Play after a reality-rated creature is defeated, even by true death. It makes one final attack with no wound penalties. All targets are flat-footed. The creature then dies, and everyone gains +1 XP. So, Jay, your thoughts on Last Gasp?
This is a very frustrating card. I don't think I've ever seen it do anything. So much so that I have kind of house ruled it that it also removes any stymied or any other kind of negative modifiers that the monster has, because I've seen it used multiple times, and oh, he gets a free attack and does nothing and then dies, and you get an XP. Woo! It's also annoying because of this +1 XP business, because everyone's XP is always like divisible by 5 all the time, and now all of a sudden there's this one. It's just kind of annoying. It's just harder to track. So I don't know. I'm sure like players love it. Extra XP for almost nothing. Because if you've defeated the reality rated creature, which is usually the big bad. I mean, you can fight reality rated creatures in any scene, but it's probably worth keeping this till the end. If you've defeated that big reality rated creature, you're probably done anyway. So even if they knock all but one of you out, it's probably not going to matter unless you need to like run away out of the crumbling castle or something like that. But even still, I also usually let them kind of do the multi-target with no penalty kind of thing, because it was just a freebie otherwise. I want there to be at least some feeling of danger when you play this. And it's a delicate balance, because you also don't want a player to think, well, I'm never playing this if I'm just going to get killed from doing it. So you just ideally want to cause some shock or maybe a wound with it. But if it's at the end of the adventure, it doesn't mean anything. So really, you kind of just want to get a possibility out of them, maybe. I don't know. It's tough. I have a lot of personal issues with this card. I don't really know how to bring up properly, but I do not like it.
Mark,
Your thoughts on Last Gasp?
I'm with Jay. The +1 XP bugs me. It's the only card that I know of that does this. You get the +1 XP for, okay, big deal. You get a +1 in a skill point somewhere, or for the OCD or the CDO people, that +1 just sitting in your XP now, just making it a weird number is problematic, and I don't really get the point of that. But I mean, it's free XP, so sure, why not? I love the house rule idea of the bad guy gets his final attack with no penalties. Easier to say than all the other words that are on there. It's just I came out of the box. It's the Balrog, lashing out at Gandalf with the whip. It's the, Jason making that final stab. It's the thing that's laying there, and he gets back up and it grabs you. The last gasp of the monster that you think you've killed. And when players play this, I know Jay says, I've never seen this do anything. Yeah, but dice explode. Ones happen, and so do 10s and 20s, and everybody knows it. And so when you get a chance to roll that last shot, and you're taking it, whether it's at one person or the whole party or multiples, whatever, you could nut the roll and all of a sudden everybody's got, 24 damage incoming, and the squishies are like, guys, that's like 6 wounds. And okay. But yeah, I would like to see this. I would like to see this revamped a little bit, reworded so that it could be more of an impactful card at the end of the combat, um, and become a thing that is more like the trope with the big bad putting the knife in somebody at the last minute that really matters, because I don't think it does right now.
So I like the tropeness of it, the last gasp. I'm not too worried about the +1 XP. I almost see it as here's a little bonus for playing in Orrorsh. Thank you for coming to Orrorsh, because I know you don't want to, especially people from Classic Torg who have experienced Orrorsh there and don't understand. It's a bit different in Torg Eternity, so giving them that 1 XP for adventuring in Orrorsh isn't that bad. And I'm not one of those who's the non-divisible by 5 bugs me, because I experiment with my own XP where I give 1 per scene, hand them out at the end of an act. So some of the ones that have 7 acts, they'll get 7 XP out of that, and the other ones that there's 3 scenes in an act, they get 3 XP. So that doesn't bother me. But yes, the big thing is, I want to say the 2 times I've seen this played, it was very similar to Jay's experience, where it really didn't do anything. And it's almost like what all player Storm Knights get anyway, because when a player Storm Knight is defeated, they get an immediate last act without wound penalties. So it's kind of just giving the big bad the same thing that the players get. But to each their own. It's a middle card. I wouldn't say it's a great card, but I wouldn't consider it a horrible card either.
I might even think of changing it to just do what People's Revised Trap card does. It does a bonus die wounds split amongst the players.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Just
but then it takes out the flavor of whatever reality rated foe it got played on. So I like the flavor of this reality rated foe does these things. It's
true.
Okay, let's move on to 17, Angry Spirits. The trees, objects, or buildings of a place are restless and shifts to make sudden attack. All Storm Knights in the area must make a fear test. Any who fail suffer 1 wound or suffer defeat on a mishap. Survivors gain 1 possibility each. So, thoughts on Angry Spirits, Jay?
You gotta really be desperate for possibilities to play this card. Or be a bunch of people who are immune to fear. Or have, because there are a few perks that do give bonuses, or let others use your willpower. So if you all have really good fear willpowers, then this is probably fine. But the fact that if you fail it, the mishap is brutal.
Mm-hmm.
Just bam, defeat test. And because you failed a fear test to get there, you're very stymied for your defeat test. So, yeah. This is what I think players think of when they think of Orrorsh Cosm cards and say that they're all bad. Because this is, you'd have to be so desperate to even to play this, in my opinion.
Mark, your thoughts on Angry Spirits?
Well, if you're going to let somebody who has Steady On take the fear test for everybody, if this is played, I don't know that you're desperate at that point, because every Storm Knight I've seen that's built for Steady On is built to make fear tests successfully. That's what they're designed for. Mm-hmm. And for that matter, if you've got 5 Storm Knights and one of them is the Orrorshian Colonel who's built for Steady On, and you spend your 1 possibility to get your successful, because you have to, because you got a 2 on the roll, whatever, and then you make you make it successful, you get your one possibility back. Everybody else gains one. So do you
But
let
if you mishap, everyone is defeated.
that's fair. Absolutely. And I guess you get, you can have that conversation at the
I'm
table.
just
Do you want
picturing
to?
that.
Oh, that would be epic. Oh, that's so bad. But, by the same token,
Yeah.
I might, I'm in that instance, depending on who was rolling the steady on, I might want to make my own roll.
Yeah.
We're talking to you, Jim.
We've all got that guy.
I didn't want to call him out because I keep doing it. So I'm glad Leamon did. But yeah, I was thinking of Jim.
No, this one it fits, but it's so much worse than that last gasp.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
If like last gasp was this, to me it would make more sense. The defeat test. It'd be like, hey, does everybody have a second chance or a master plan to master plan that second chance? Type thing. It's one of those, and the more like I play in the large groups, as you know. So if I'm like eight players, one of them is gonna be more likely to suffer a defeat test than if you're playing with 3 or 4, or even 5. That's one of those. It's very situational. The one possibility, I mean, if you're built for it, one possibility, no problem. But anything that goes wrong, if Murphy Law appears when this card's played, it can lead to some badness. And there's not. I won't say this is the only thing that is like, we don't care if you have wounds or not, you suffer a defeat test. I know there's at least one other thing out there, but it's harsh. Defeat tests, usually you have to go through everybody's wounds. This one doesn't. So think about it before you play that. So let's move on to 18, Panic. You must play this card immediately if you fail a fear test. Choose another player's Cosm card and randomly and immediately play it. If it isn't playable, discard it and choose another at random until a Cosm card plays or no cards remain. So your thoughts on Panic, Jay?
This card is hilarious. I love this card. Now, it can be problematic because it can bring up some dumb situations. And truthfully, this is also part of why there's some cards like Angry Spirits, where, as Mark alluded to earlier, I would never play this card. Well, you might have to play this card if somebody plays this. But it is reliant on failing a fear test. You don't have to do it unless if you succeed at all of them. But it is worth noting that there's no benefit to it. So it's kind of a weird situation because I think this card specifically is really good and flavorful, but it has the potential to bring out some cards I don't necessarily like. And ironically, can fish good cards out of other players' hands that don't have their trigger yet and basically just waste them. Because note, it doesn't say anything about replacing that person's card, right? So if you have your last gasp that you're waiting to play for your free XP, but then someone plays this and takes it out, oh, well, you haven't defeated him, so good garbage it goes. Let's draw some new ones until we get something, and now it's gone. So this is very rough, but it's very flavorful. I like that it exists. I don't think players like that it exists, but I think it really fits. So overall, I like this card.
Mark, your thoughts on Panic?
Panic's a fantastic card. I like it a lot. I like it a lot because it has a tendency to it heightens the sense of fear, regardless of whether you whether it's successful in pulling out, the Angry Spirits card or something like it is irrelevant. The minute this card hits the table, everybody starts evaluating where they are and what Cosm card they have and how bad it is for that card to come out right now. Okay? And it's always bad. because if it wasn't bad, they would have played it already. Okay, so the degree of how bad it is we're only talking about degrees at this point, because otherwise they would have played their cards. The the control the players have is, as Jay pointed out, is you don't, if you've got possibilities and you have a fear test, you can put some juice on it and not fail the fear test if you roll well. Now here's where it gets bad though, and we haven't. You got to remember, when panic comes up, it's because you're in the middle of some situation that's caused a fear test. That doesn't just happen when the sun is shining and the birds are singing. It's usually when bad things are happening, and it's usually when you're stepping into a combat situation. So how bad does it get to be with a cascading series of failures where you failed a fear test, you may have put a possibility on it and you choked on it, and you're still failing the fear test, and this card it kicks out, and then it kicks out something like Angry Spirits. That's a bad day. Or you like Jay was saying, you're holding on to this one because you need to get the right situation's coming up, and you need possibilities, and it's not here yet, and now you just burned that card for no possibilities at all, and now you're stuck with 1 or 0, and you're still in Orrorsh in the middle of whatever the situation is that caused your fear test. That's a bad day.
Yeah, I like this card. It can be, I can see this being anywhere between two extremes of we play this other card and we get a possibility or something not that drastic happens, to a almost Scooby-Doo. I get the mental image of Scooby-Doo when they run through all the doors and they come out the other doors as cards are being grabbed and discarded, and other cards, you just have that little montage going on as the panic is setting in. Yeah, it can lead to some really rough stuff, some mess stuff, some interesting things, but it's just chaos. It's just, to me, this card is chaos, and it just is fun because of that flavor. So we'll
the other thing about it, actually, that I was just thinking of is the players. It can also kind of change what's going on, because it's not like you just suddenly draw it and reveal it. You play it when you fail a fear test. So you could say, hey guys, I got panic, right? And so now it's like, okay, if we have any of these really rough ones, maybe we should spend them now while it's manageable and not in the middle of a fight. So that way it does kind of lead the players to kind of play it a little more horror movie tropey. Let's go split up now, guys. Because we don't want that to suddenly come down when we're all gathered up for a fight and everyone loses a possibility, right? So let's split up. Let's, hopefully we don't get any fear tests, but, then we can trigger that now. And maybe then the random chance will just be between like 3 good or neutral cards.
Yeah, it's just, I was also thinking you could have your whole party all planned. Okay, we have these cards. Here's where we're using them, and then somebody plays attuned and gets this, and then you immediately have a fear test, and then everybody's plan. The whole group's plans. Yeah. So yeah, this is one that it can make you make plans. It can make you have to discard plans. It's chaos, and I love it. So let's move on to 19. Desperate Bargain. Play after any Storm Knight is defeated, but before the defeat test, roll a corruption test instead. And regardless of the result, the defeat test is treated as if it was an outstanding success. So your thoughts on Desperate Bargain, Jay?
Well, that's what you do for those guys that fail the Angry Spirits card, right? I like this card. I like it's going to be heavily dependent on whether your group interfaces with the corruption system at all or not. As I mentioned before, this is a pretty good use of a corruption test, in my opinion. An automatic outstanding is really good, especially if there's certain things that will let them just get right back into the fight as well too. So yeah, I think this is a really good one. It's thematic. a lot of people don't want to risk a corruption test, but it's kind of like, well, it's better than is your your possible corruption worse than your friend's death? You know, like who's like how greedy are you? But yeah, so I really like this one. I think it's good, and unlike some of the other corruption test ones, is a good reason to make a corruption test.
Mark, your thoughts on Desperate Bargain?
I kind of want more out of this card just because of the title. I like it, and it's got good thematic qualities to it, but I want there to be some other aspect of a bargain being made. I mean, I get that there's a corruption test involved to get your outstanding success, but you know, a lot of Storm Knights, especially when you are rolling into Orrorsh, are like, "Ooh, let me bump up my willpower." Um, I need to be able to make these corruption tests and whatnot, bump up my skills so that I can make these corruption tests. I want there to be some other aspect of the person who plays it has some kind of lasting bargain, desperate bargain, that because the person that makes corruption tests all day long isn't going to sweat this. They're the same people who are can play the whole act with one Orrorsh possibility, and they keep spending and buying back the same possibility because they just make corruption tests left and right. Okay, yeah, I get ones happen, but still, desperate bargain. I want there to be a bargain there. That said, you could almost make this into a planned, I'm going to spend all my possibilities, and then when I get ready to test for defeat, I'm going to play this and make my corruption test, and I don't have to spend a possibility. So I can spend my possibilities on doing other things over here, and then if I have to make a corruption test, or if I have to make a test for defeat, instead of making my test for defeat because I've been defeated, I play this card and I make my corruption test and I'm outstanding.
I'll say this isn't a get out of jail free, but it's a get out of death. It's not free because there's a corruption test. I do see this card as being able to alleviate some of the player worry about going into Orrorsh, because then they know, hey, if I die, I at least have I play this, and no matter what, I'm not going to die. Because it says on any Storm Knight, it could be any. I would say out of all the ones that we've already talked about where you needed to have a defeat test, this is probably the best out of them, because we've talked about it before. They happen so rarely that usually we say they're niche and they're not as useful. This one is a good peace of mind card, even though it says Dark Bargain and you got to make a corruption test. It's still a keep my character after this adventure safely or somewhat safely. I think is pretty cool with that.
It's like the Orrorsh version of Inevitable Return.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a question for you. Who makes the corruption test?
I would say the person it's getting played on. Not the person playing
the defeated Storm Knight?
The defeated.
Okay. So that's the thing. You might be the willpower guy, but if you're not the one getting defeated, it's the person who's being defeated that's the willpower that matters, right? When I first read it, I assumed it was just the person who played the card made the corruption test, but after looking at it more closely, it sounds like it's the person who would have been making the defeat test, yeah.
Right, that might be something, because it doesn't specify. Your game master, your table might determine. I took it, just assumed, bad for me for assuming that it would be that person who's making the defeat test, because it says before it's test, before you do that test, you do the corruption test instead, but it doesn't specify the actual roller of the corruption test. So I would say it would be the person being defeated, but if your table determined that you wanted the person who played the card to do it, that I see as being equally valid.
You draw this, check.
Yeah.
I'm with Leamon on that. I think that the person who is being defeated is the one, because they're the person that's making the desperate bargain.
Yeah.
They want to live, right? And so, and here's where I get, you're trading a charisma point to survive, essentially, if it goes bad, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. Other than that, if you make your corruption test, nothing happens. There is no desperate bargain. I would like to see something else. That you just got. You were going to test for defeat. You made a deal with the devil, so you don't have to test for defeat. Deals with the devil. You never walk away from the deal with the devil without being unscathed. You never walk away from a deal with the devil unscathed. Something has to happen. I don't know what it is, but
yeah, I'm almost surprised they didn't add the. I can't remember the exact name of the perk, but there's a perk that you can get if a similar thing happens. That it's just like, oh, nothing happens. Don't worry about it. He, and it doesn't. It's just
Yeah.
it's just you have a corruption perk now. So I'm not sure. I think
I would see
adding that to it would be, maybe the thing that you do. If you want
Yes.
if you want there to be something, even if the corruption test is okay, you can do it, then you get this perk that doesn't do anything, but it's a corruption perk. Huh. That can lead to other
smiling
things.
deceiver, whatever that first corruption perk is, maybe that's the desperate bargain. Agree to accept a corruption perk. Your test is outstanding. No roll is necessary. From the game master standpoint, I like that a lot better because you just made a desperate bargain.
So, different ways. I would highly suggest, if no matter what, determine who's making the roll
Yeah.
for the table before it appears. This is not something you want to argue at the, hey, I want to play this on Joe's, and Joe's like, man, I have a willpower of 6 and a charisma of 5. Yeah. And you're like, yeah, but I got willpower of this and that. So you want to make sure you understand what's going on. So let's move on to the last card, 20, Innocent Bystander. Play when an encounter begins. A frightened person gets caught up in the events and is in direct danger. All Storm Knights gain 1 possibility if the bystander survives the encounter. So, Jay, your thoughts on Innocent Bystander?
I like it. It's a really good, flavorful card. It's kind of similar yet different to a Nile Empire one. I think sometimes players, the Storm Knights, are so over the top that they kind of forget what it's like for the regular Joe out there dealing with all of this crazy stuff. So having just some normal people like Victorians or Indians or wherever in Orrorsh you are, who are there just trying to survive, kind of helps balance everything and center Orrorsh because it's not as flashy as the other realms. So I think it really works. And then potentially lots of things, you get your possibilities as long as they survive the encounter. And then after the encounter, the GM is free to do what they want with them to reinforce the horror elements. But then also this bystander could also be a good source for connections later, for romance, all that kind of stuff. And if it's a mixed Orrorsh Pan Pacifica zone, they could also betray you after. There's all kinds of things that can happen.
So, Mark, your thoughts on Innocent Bystander?
I 100% think this is Nile Empire superimposing itself on Orrorsh, and I really wish that there was a small bit in this card that if the bystander doesn't survive, everyone loses a possibility, because now it's an Orrorsh card. It's a Nile Empire card masquerading as an Orrorsh card otherwise, in my opinion. For home games, the possibility of who this bystander is Jay's 100% correct. You should never waste this. You should not waste this bystander, whoever it is. Come up with a name. Have a list of names, Victorian names. on the side that when, because players love to do that. It's like, so what's your name? You're like, crap, I've already said Bob and Lisa twice. I can't use that again. So, have a list of names, and when they come up, and Colonel Smithers, you just saved Colonel Smithers' life, and he's very grateful, and now you have a connection. Or you didn't know he's a werewolf in 3 acts from now, or whatever. Yeah, there's all kinds of ways to play with that and add depth to your game with just a simple list of names for the bystander. But yeah, I want more Orrorsh on this card and less Nile Empire. Otherwise, it's a great card.
I like the card. I believe when I was going through a Trifling Matter, I played this. I always do like, as both of you said, taking the people that are introduced by these type of cards and bringing them in, turning them into connections, whether that connection is a trap or not. You can do that, or a possibility of a, hey, we saved this guy, and in the future now he's being captured and going to be the victim of a sacrifice or something like that. We got to save him again. It just brings some personal connections between the Storm Knights and the people that they're trying to save. I mean, that's the whole purpose of the entire game, is saving the Earth from these possibility raiders, and this can give them that connection, in game story connection. So yeah, I really like this card. So that's what we have for today, cards 11 through 20. Please do email us at torgdcd@gmail.com. We will read your emails. We'll answer any questions you have. And we thank you again for continuing to either watch or listen to these episodes. And until next time, we hope you have fun in your own Cosmverse. Bye.